Princess Asara Voskin of the Threnvax Dominion had been assigned 17 different personal bodyguards across her 23 years of formal royal protection, each one selected for the same qualities her father's considerable security apparatus had always prioritized: unwavering vigilance, physical capability, and a particular kind of watchful, constant conversation. Her culture's protective doctrine considered essential to demonstrating a guard's continuous engagement with potential threat. Her 18th bodyguard, a human security contractor named James Sorensen, assigned through the Diplomatic Protection Exchange Program following the formal alliance between Earth and the Dominion, spoke to her exactly 4 times across their first 3 months of shared duty, and Asara Voskin found herself, to her own considerable surprise, more genuinely at ease in his careful, deliberate silence than she had ever felt across 17 previous guards' constant, reassuring conversation. The Dominion's royal protection doctrine, refined across 4 centuries of careful institutional development, treated a personal guard's continuous verbal engagement as a foundational security principle. A guard who spoke frequently and observably to their assigned royal charge demonstrated, according to the doctrine's considerable theoretical framework, active, ongoing vigilance rather than the kind of passive, potentially distracted watchfulness that 4 centuries of documented security incidents had gradually taught Threnvax protective theory to consider genuinely dangerous. James Sorensen's initial assignment, arranged through diplomatic channels that had required considerable negotiation given the Dominion's unfamiliarity with human security protocol, had proceeded, across his first several weeks, in a manner that generated genuine institutional concern among Princess Asara's considerable existing security staff. The human guard's engagement pattern deviates significantly from our established protocol, reported Chief Security Officer Vesik Asa, presenting an early assessment to Princess Asara's father, King Threxel Voskin, 3 weeks into James Sorensen's initial assignment. He maintains physical proximity and positioning entirely consistent with our security requirements, and his tactical response during the 2 minor security incidents we have documented during his tenure demonstrated capability exceeding our established baseline. However, he engages in almost no verbal communication with the princess beyond the minimum functionally necessary for coordinating movement and schedule logistics. Our considerable prior experience across 17 previous royal guards suggests this represents either significant professional deficiency or, potentially, some form of concealed threat our screening process failed to properly identify. Princess Asara, whose own considerable prior experience across 17 previous bodyguards had produced a specific, exhausted familiarity with the particular kind of constant, watchful conversation Threnvax protective doctrine required, found herself, in the initial weeks of James Sorensen's assignment, genuinely uncertain how to interpret a guard whose behavior so thoroughly departed from everything her considerable prior royal experience had led her to expect. "You do not speak much," she observed, during their 3rd week of shared duty, addressing James Sorensen directly during a formal diplomatic function where his careful, silent positioning at her side had, by that point, become a genuine source of curiosity rather than the professional concern her security staff continued to document. "No, Your Highness," he said, his response carrying the same careful, economical directness that had characterized nearly every prior exchange between them. "I don't think there's usually much that needs saying when the situation's calm. I'd rather stay quiet and actually pay attention to what's happening around us than fill the silence with conversation just because that's what people expect a guard to do." "My previous guard spoke constantly," Asara said. "Our protective doctrine considers continuous verbal engagement essential to demonstrating active vigilance. Your silence has generated considerable concern among my security staff, who suspect it may reflect either professional inadequacy or some form of concealed deficiency in your actual attentiveness. James Sorensen considered this observation with the same unhurried, careful thoughtfulness he brought to most exchanges, a quality Asara had, by that point, begun to notice represented something considerably more deliberate than simple taciturn disposition. "I understand why that might look concerning from your security staff's perspective," he said. "I want to explain something if you're willing to hear it, because I think there's an important difference between what your protective doctrine considers vigilance and what I actually think vigilance requires. Every time I'm talking, Your Highness, some portion of my attention is necessarily going toward constructing what I'm saying, thinking about how to phrase things, tracking the conversation's direction. That's not a criticism of your previous guards. It's just how conversation works for humans and, I'd guess, for your people too. I've found, across considerable years doing this work, that I actually notice more, react faster, and catch potential problems earlier when I'm not simultaneously managing an ongoing conversation. My silence isn't disengagement, Your Highness. It's actually the opposite. It's me giving everything I've got to actually watching what's happening around you, instead of splitting that attention with talk that mostly exists to reassure people I'm paying attention, rather than actually helping me pay attention more effectively." Princess Asara, whose considerable prior experience with 17 guards constant, reassuring conversation had never once produced anything resembling this specific, direct explanation of an underlying protective philosophy, found herself, across the following months, developing a genuine, considerable appreciation for a quality her own culture's protective doctrine had always treated as a deficiency requiring correction. "I find myself considerably more at ease in your silence than I ever felt in my previous guard's constant conversation," she admitted, during a private conversation conducted 6 months into James Sorensen's assignment, a rare, unguarded moment that had, by that point, become an increasingly frequent feature of their working relationship. "I do not fully understand why this is the case, given that my culture's entire protective tradition suggests I should find your silence considerably more concerning than reassuring. I think maybe it's because silence, when it's genuine and not just awkward avoidance, actually creates space for a person to just exist, without having to perform being okay or being interesting or keeping some kind of conversation going for somebody else's comfort," James said. "I've noticed, across the months I've been doing this assignment, that you spend a considerable amount of your public life performing exactly that kind of constant, reassuring engagement for diplomats, for your own security staff, for pretty much everybody around you. I figured the last thing you probably needed was your own bodyguard adding one more person you had to perform for, just to make them feel like they were doing their job properly. I'd rather just actually be here, quietly, paying attention, so you've got at least one person around you who doesn't need anything from you except your genuine safety." The specific, gradual development of what both James Sorensen and Princess Asara would eventually, separately, describe as a genuine emotional connection, one that emerged almost entirely through the particular quality of comfortable, unguarded silence James's specific protective philosophy had cultivated across their considerable shared duty, would eventually generate the kind of diplomatic and cultural complication that neither party had originally anticipated when the exchange program had first assigned them to shared duty. Princess Asara's documented emotional attachment to her assigned human bodyguard represents a diplomatic complication our exchange program's original framework did not adequately anticipate, reported the Dominion's Diplomatic Oversight Committee, reviewing a situation that had, by the assignment's 10th month, become impossible for the royal court's considerable political apparatus to continue treating as a private matter. Threnvac's royal marriage tradition carries considerable political significance extending well beyond personal preference, and a romantic attachment between the princess and a human security contractor, however genuine, raises significant questions our formal diplomatic protocol has never previously required us to address. King Threxel Voskin, whose own considerable political authority carried the weight of 4 centuries of royal succession tradition, addressed the matter directly with his daughter during a formal audience, convened specifically to discuss what his own considerable political staff had, by that point, formally classified as a genuine succession and diplomatic concern. "I understand your attachment to Guard Sorensen," he said, during the formal audience, addressing his daughter with the particular careful diplomatic weight his own considerable royal position required him to bring to any matter touching succession politics. "I do not dismiss the genuine quality of what you appear to have found in his particular approach to your protection. But I ask you to consider, seriously, the considerable political complexity any formalized relationship between yourself and a human security contractor would introduce, both regarding our own internal succession tradition and the broader diplomatic relationship between our dominion and Earth, a relationship still in its relatively early, delicate stages of mutual trust and formal alliance." "I understand the political complexity, Father," Asara said, addressing her father with a directness that her own considerable royal upbringing had never previously required her to bring to a matter this personally significant. "I do not dismiss it, and I understand this is not simply a private matter I am free to resolve according to my own preference alone, given everything our family's position represents. But I want you to understand something about what James has actually offered me across these 10 months, that I do not believe any of my 17 previous guards, however professionally capable, ever managed to provide. He has never once needed anything from me beyond my genuine safety. Every other person in my life, however well-intentioned, requires something from me: my performance as a princess, my political utility, my careful, constant management of everyone else's expectations regarding who I am supposed to be. James simply exists alongside me, quietly, attentively, without ever once asking me to be anything beyond exactly who I already am. I do not know if that is sufficient reason to navigate whatever political complexity you are describing. But I know it represents something I have never once experienced across 23 years of formal royal life, and I am not certain I am willing to simply set it aside, because our political tradition has not yet developed a framework for accommodating it." The formal diplomatic resolution, eventually negotiated across several additional months of careful political and cultural negotiation between the Dominion's royal court and Earth's diplomatic corps, would establish, through a process that both James Sorensen and Princess Asara would later describe as considerably more complicated than either had originally anticipated, a formal framework allowing their relationship to continue and eventually, following additional years of careful political preparation, achieve a form of formal recognition that Threnvac's succession tradition had never previously accommodated. James Sorensen, addressing a considerably later interview conducted years into a relationship that had, by that point, become a formally recognized, and within the broader Dominion political culture, genuinely celebrated example of successful cross-species integration, offered a reflection that captured, with considerable directness, the specific quality that had originally distinguished his approach from 17 previous guards' more conventional protective philosophy. "People keep asking me what I did exactly to end up here, married to a princess, of all the strange things that could have happened in my career," he said. "And honestly, I don't think I did anything particularly remarkable. I just did my job the way I've always done it, paying careful, quiet attention to the person I'm actually protecting, instead of performing vigilance through constant conversation the way a lot of protective doctrine, human and Threnvax both, apparently assumes is necessary." I think Asara found something in that quiet attention that she'd never actually experienced before, not because I'm particularly special, but because everybody else in her entire life had always needed something from her, some kind of performance or reassurance or political utility. I just needed her to be safe. It turns out that's a pretty rare thing to offer somebody who spent her entire life being needed for everything, except just being exactly who she actually is. And I think that's really the whole story, as unremarkable as it probably sounds. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer somebody isn't grand gestures or constant attention. It's just quiet, genuine presence, without any hidden expectation attached to it. And letting that be enough, all on its own, for as long as it takes for them to realize how rare that actually is.